Welcome to What is Self-Publishing and Why Should I Care? This is a video for brand new writers as well as published authors who've never looked into it before. One of my goals is to explain to you why it might be to your benefit to know more about it, even if you don't intend to self-publish yourself. When I first started self-publishing, there were a lot of bloggers and podcasters who were sort of figuring out this whole self-publishing space along with us. And now many of them are talking about more advanced strategies, or they've moved into other things entirely. And the beginner info that you can find is sometimes outdated. So hopefully I can answer some of your common questions and give you a comprehensive view of what self-publishing looks like. This is a condensed version of a longer talk that I used to give, so not all of the notes that appear in the slideshow are going to be featured, but you can feel free to pause anytime as we go along and read them in more detail. The first reason I think you might want to study self-publishing, even if you're not doing it, is because I believe what you don't know about your IP rights can hurt your career. Nowadays, indies are leveraging not only their ebook rights, but also their audiobook rights and their translation rights. And a lot of these things weren't viable moneymakers for publishers in the past, especially for low to mid-level authors. So while in the past, production barriers might have existed because of either the cost of production or the distribution. Now, if you don't know that audiobooks, for example, are earning more than they used to, or that translation has become more affordable than it used to be, or that more countries have strong ebook markets outside of the United States and Europe, then you're going to either undervalue yourself while you're negotiating your contract, or you're going to give up rights that you didn't realize you should be attempting to hold on to or attempting to get paid for. A second reason is that while you might not have the flexibility to run advertisements and sales on your own books if you're traditionally published, the techniques that indie authors are using to reach readers are things such as running a blog or maintaining a social media presence or managing an email newsletter. They're things that your publisher probably won't do for you and might actually expect you to do anyway. And if you're already proficient in these things and you're looking to get published, then you're going to have an easier time getting picked up as a client than somebody who the publisher knows is not comfortable engaging with fans. Here's a slide with some of the things I'm going to cover in this talk. I'm going to try and keep it under 20 minutes. One disclaimer before we start. A point of contention that's been around for a while is that some people believe self-published authors are giving writers a bad name, and that they drive readers away from reading by putting out bad books. Nowadays, I believe that you will get drowned out by all the high-quality content out there if you put out a bad book, and most of the people who can afford to put out a professionally designed cover have learned that their series sell better when they hire editors. So we are seeing in the indie space, authors on many levels are being competitive with what's coming out of traditional publishing, dominating the bestseller lists and making it hard for anyone who isn't up to par to even get eyes on their books. So you can put that rough draft out there with a sloppy cover and no editing, but good luck trying to get any attention. Now, when I talk about modern self-publishing, I'm not actually talking about paperback books anymore. For the most part, self-published authors are making their money selling ebooks. And if we're not talking about ebooks, then we're misunderstanding what self-publishing is right now for the majority of successful authors in self-publishing. The market for audio is growing, but that's a recent thing that I'm not going to cover here. If selling paperbacks at bookstores is your goal, then you might as well stay in traditional publishing, I think. It's hard to even sell paperbacks online until you've got strong digital sales first. For all intents and purposes, when I'm talking about successful self-published authors' income, I'm talking about 70 to 90% of that income coming from ebooks and another 10 to 30% coming from digital audiobook and print-on-demand paperback sales, either through the marketplace or through direct sales on a website. There's a little bit of market for other things depending on what your field is, such as speaking, consulting, and selling merchandise on your website. So how did ebooks get so big? Well, there are competitors now, but in the early days, most of the competitors weren't able to beam the book directly into your e-reader, and that was the key differentiator with the Kindle. The other key is the Amazon store, which is massive and powerful. They're good at putting books in front of customers that the customers will like. There's, of course, the Nook and the Kobo and other e-readers. Barnes & Noble have recently indicated that they want to dedicate a little more energy in that area, so we should be seeing a little more growth there. Apple and Google Books have really been growing lately. Kobo has always been a big competitor in this space because they were an early investor in international markets that Amazon wasn't originally as focused on. Amazon is still a big deal. They have powerful book recommendation algorithms that help readers find new books to purchase, whereas most of the other marketplaces rely more exclusively on curated content. Therefore, not only is it harder for a self-published author to get traction in those stores, especially just starting out, but it's also harder for niche readers or people with unique tastes to find more books similar to the ones that they like. So for this and other reasons, the average author will still see 70 to 100% of their income coming from Amazon, and we tend to talk about Amazon like they are the only game in town. Another disclaimer: none of these are facts. This is just my opinion, and my personal experience may be a lot different from what other people are seeing. Also, at the top of my notes, you will see some dates. These aren't exact dates. These are my estimation of when these changes had the biggest impact. So you could give or take a couple of years from the dates that you're going to see in the headings. All I really care about is showing that there has been an evolution in how we think about ebook sales. So early on, we were seeing a lot of people having runaway success stories, and these outliers were the result of all of these people having brand new e-readers that they needed to fill up. You saw people selling millions of copies of 99-cent books and becoming millionaires, because at the time, it was an easy purchase and there was a gap in the marketplace for these cheap books to fill new empty e-readers. That just doesn't happen anymore very often because there are plenty of discount books going around. Every couple of years, you'll see a new strategy begin working, and people will jump on that bandwagon. For a while, it was freebies. If you make the first book in a series free, you wouldn't have to pay for advertising. People would just go out and download it by the thousands, and then if the book was good, those people would go on to buy every other book in a 7-book series. That's still one tactic that works especially well for authors who are established and have big series to sell through to. At some point, people learned the best way to get a distributor to tell your readers about your book was to put the next book out in the series. And so self-published authors began publishing very fast. And there are some people who can write quality books and make it sustainable. There were also some people who churned out unfinished and unpolished books. But again, the market has shown that the people who put good time and energy into it will last longer. So the people who can write good books fast have done very well for themselves. The people who were just taking advantage haven't stuck around as long. Amazon has introduced various programs to make it more profitable if you make your books exclusive with them. There are still people benefiting from this, but there is a split in the author community between people who think it's too good of a deal to pass up on and those who don't want to put all their eggs in one basket. I'm not going to dwell on this because it's a more advanced topic, but you should be aware that there is this difference. People are always trying new things. For a while, their book bundles were working very well, and we saw some cool things happening with compilations and short story collections. Things continue to change as the marketplace matures and we see less runaway successes. There are still a few things, every year something new will be popular. There will be a certain ad platform that's performing better than all the others, and the next year the marketplace will become crowded by too many people buying ads there. Or they'll change their rates and they'll change the way the clicks and sales are reported, and everyone will move on to the next big thing. I'm not going to talk about going wide because it's a topic that deserves a presentation on its own, but suffice it to say, a lot of people worried about how much of their income comes from Amazon and have made sure not to limit themselves to a single distributor. Like I said, this is a source of some division in the author community, but for the most part, authors tend to try it both ways and see which one they like better. And now that the market's maturing, we're seeing smaller shifts. We're not seeing the runaway successes. You'll see a few people doing well with this, so everyone starts doing it too. And then things will come back down to where they were. A few people will have luck with one thing, everyone else follows, and then it becomes less successful as everyone starts doing it. You'll see some people have big losses as something important stops working for them, and then they'll figure out the solution and things will get a little bit better for everyone. One of the biggest disruptions we've seen lately is that now, finally, 10 years after the fact, traditional publishing houses are finally starting to take a greater interest in ebooks. They're learning that online ads work. And so before, where it was just indie authors competing against one another that drove up the price of some of the ads on some of these platforms, we are now seeing that big publishing houses are starting to set the rates. For example, when it comes to how much an ad costs, because they're finally spending money on these things. But it remains to be seen how limber they can be, because some of these sales and ad platforms require a lot of limberness. These are large businesses. It takes longer for a business to realize that a certain sales platform isn't working anymore and to do an about face than it does for someone like me to look at my sales numbers or read an ad about a new digital medium and turn on a dime and try something different tomorrow. That is one of the major advantages of being an indie author. By now you've probably heard me say indies a couple of times. Indie books is a common phrase in traditional publishing, but it means something different here. All due respect goes to indie bookstores and indie presses. We owe them a lot for what they've done, and they continue to do great work, and I hope that someday self-published authors and indie bookstores and presses can work together even more than they are now. But when I say independent here, I mean it in the same sense as an indie musician is independent from any record label. So I would say that an author who publishes an ebook on an e-reader has more in common with a musician who puts out their work through something like SoundCloud, which means we are in a sense beholden to some of the large corporations that run these distribution platforms, and there is something very not indie about that. So I'm a little conflicted about the terminology. There was a time where Kobo had an exclusive deal to sell their e-readers with a major organization of independent bookstores in the United States, and I was really excited to see if that would give independent authors a sort of foothold in the physical bookstore area. But that was a very long time ago, and I think it fell apart. So it would be cool to see something like that happen again, and we do see self-published authors approaching independent bookstores individually and getting their books on the shelves. So I'm a little conflicted about the rise of this new terminology, but it does feel good to say indie. And as self-published authors are improving their craft, they are starting to talk about it in different ways. So we say indie now instead of self-published. Okay, we'll talk about platform for a bit. These are things that a lot of TradPub authors can also do, and probably some of you have done already. Your platform is everything that you put out into the world, especially your online presence as an author. My platform, for example, is, so what usually happens is if someone has read my book in the past and they want to see if I have any more out, they can search for me and they will find my biggest distributor, where they will also see all the books I've written, and they'll probably find a link to my website. There they might find a couple of blogs. You won't find this video, for example, unless you're looking for that kind of thing, because I don't want to put a direct link between something that is intended for my readers of my fiction and something that is intended for other writers. But because someone who's very interested can still dig it up, I consider it to be a part of my platform in a sort of peripheral way. And I like that because if someone's really interested in finding more about me, they might see this video and appreciate knowing that as an author, I'm actively writing and engaged in author business. And that creates a little mental image of me sort of tapping away on my typewriter in a cozy studio somewhere. And I try to describe my workspace even in my author's note at the end of my books. And because I'm leasing this little reading nook in the image center of their brain, they're a lot more likely to think of me when they think about authors in general, and to remember to check in on me when it's time for them to find their next new book. So I think that's one of the things that you can do with your author's note. The author's note in the back of the book is an important part of your platform as well. If a reader finishes a book and is grateful to you for giving it to them, they will usually be willing to do one thing for you if you ask of them. So I like to ask people to join my newsletter. Other authors ask the reader if they would consider leaving a review, or they provide them with a link where they can buy the next book. There's a certain amount of goodwill that you can trade upon, and I like to be earnest with my readers because I think they appreciate that, and I like to have them join the newsletter because as times have changed, we've seen a lot of the things that used to work to sell books have come and gone, but one thing that you never really lose is your email list and your newsletter, so you can still reach old fans with a new email, even if the platform where they purchased your first book no longer exists. Okay, moving on. If we're talking about self-publishing, we should probably talk about how you publish. And these are some of the different distributors through which you can put your books out into the world. I have an account on Amazon's KDP dashboard that I use to upload my ebooks. It will accept Word files, and most people prefer to convert the Word file into an ebook format before uploading. For every other distributor, I use an aggregator that puts the book out to a dozen different platforms for me. They take 10% of all sales there. So if I was earning more, I would split out all of the marketplace that I mentioned earlier in the video, and I would sell to those distributors directly so that I don't have to give up a larger share of my royalties. But because I'm a developmental editor and not a full-time author, I don't earn enough to make it worth the time. I should mention pricing. I don't know if I did. If you price your book below $2.99 or above $9.99 for some of these distributors, they will reduce your royalty rate from 70% to 30%. And I think this is to discourage people from pricing outside of this range that they think is optimal. But putting a book on sale for 99 cents is a good strategy still to get eyes on a book, and some people do it anyway and make up for the loss of the royalties when they sell later books in their series at the normal prices. You will find that self-published authors generally publish in series, and that's because it's a lot easier to sell someone the next book in the same series as the book that they just read and love. If all of your books are standalone, then you have to rely on them loving you, the author, enough to pick up the next book. And that's a slightly harder sell, especially knowing that you're not going to be telling the same story that you told with the same characters as last time. And if that's the kind of books that you write, then you might be an ideal author for the traditional model. But that's not to say you can't have success writing standalones as an indie author, because I have seen it and I edited for people who do that and it has worked well enough for them. I'm not going to talk about advertising because that's an advanced topic and might not be as useful for those of you in traditional publishing. There is a whole industry that has popped up around indie authors and their need for all the things that a publisher would normally provide. I'm not going to link to those because a lot of these things change, and some of the places where you can find a good editor or a cover designer will have changed by next year. So the best thing you can do is find an author group you're comfortable in, find a community, and ask around the community where they're finding their designers and their editors and get a recommendation. I'm not going to recommend a community because that will probably have changed too. When I was first starting out, I turned to podcasts. I sifted through what was out there until I found some podcasters who I liked and I trusted. They were people who weren't promising to make me rich and successful, but they had a we're all in this together mentality. And they were also interviewing authors who were successful in the genres that I liked to read. So I could judge for myself whether those authors were reliable authorities just by looking at their books and how well those books were doing on the various online platforms, as well as the content of the books to make sure they were legitimately good. When you find a podcast you like, you'll also find online communities built up around them, and that's where you can ask those questions. So, is self-publishing worth it? I'm not here to convince you of that. I would rather focus on why you might not want to do it. Personally, I do think it's worth it, and I think that the outlook for the future of indie publishing is a rosy one, at least in the short to medium term. I think there's room for growth. Whether we can continue to see growth as the traditional publishing houses become more interested in the digital marketplace remains to be seen, but as long as there continues to be competition between them, as well as between them and the large distributors who are sometimes larger corporations than they are, we will always see that competition creating room within the marketplace for independent publishers to find a foothold. But we'll end on this. Why would you not want to self-publish? I don't want to give you the impression that I'm pushing you to leave your publisher or to put your first book out online and jump into the deep end when there's a very good chance that you will sink. And the reasons you might not want to do it: first, no one's going to stop you from putting out a bad book. You can put something out without editing, something that doesn't make sense, something that nobody is interested in reading, and there is no one to tell you that it's a bad idea. Also, if you're hiring an editor or a designer, there's always a chance that you don't know what they're doing, and you could hire a graphic designer to make a cover, and because you aren't a graphic designer yourself, you won't be able to judge whether that person is professional enough to make a professional cover for you, and you might end up paying good money for a bad cover, even though you think you did everything right, because you don't have the level of oversight that a publishing house would provide. There's also not as much prestige or as many credentials in self-publishing a book. It used to be that if you had self-published a book, you couldn't get a traditional publishing contract. And I still do believe that there is some stigma to it, but again, it's rapidly changing. It's also important to understand your genre when you're getting into self-publishing. You probably won't make a ton of money in the literary fiction genre. I'm not saying that nobody is, there's always exceptions, but it's not something that I see people making a killing in as self-published authors. People are doing well with science fiction, they're doing well with fantasy, they're doing well with mystery, very well with romance, and a number of others. Your genre will limit you a bit, and if you want to hop around between genres, that might also be harder. Nonfiction is a whole other thing that I don't understand very well, but some people are having a lot of success there. Also, how you measure your success depends on expectations. If, for example, a nonfiction author isn't looking to get online sales, but is already making a living through being a public speaker or another business, they might just want to have a book available to give to people at events. And so simply having a well-done book might be a success for them. I have a poetry book that I put out 10 years ago. It sells a copy or two every month, and every once in a while in December, I'll sell 6 or 7, but I'm just thrilled about that. And it seems like every year it sells a few copies more than it did the last year. And if that book had been put out by a small press, it might have been out of print years ago. So 10 years on, for that book, I consider this a success. And one of the cool things about being an independent author is I still own the rights to it. So if I wanted to, I could put a new cover on it and do a big marketing push in the months before releasing my next collection. That is the kind of flexibility that being an independent author allows, and it's very fun for me, and is one of the reasons that I don't worry too much about whether or not that book is going to sell. I still have a good time with it. Anyway, I'll read what it says here and then I'll let you go. If none of that has dissuaded you, you are not alone. There are a lot of great resources you can use and a large and enthusiastic community to help you along the way. So now, hopefully, you have an understanding of what self-publishing is, how you do it, and why you might or might not want to do it. Thank you for your time, and good luck.